National Alliance of Caregiving and the AARP report that during this past year in 2020, approximately 53 million U.S. adults are caregivers for a loved one, a neighbor, someone they care about, or someone they support through work. The day Karen Warner Schueler became a sudden caregiver, she was a wife, a mom, a consultant, business owner, a coach, a runner, and a consumer of too much Starbucks coffee. She was not a caregiver until she was. On the day her late husband was suddenly diagnosed out of the blue with stage 4 cancer, Karen had no idea that she had instantly joined a silent army of unpaid and informal family caregivers around the world who had instantly been pressed into unexpected service. She felt completely at sea with the realities of caregiving. Now, this executive coach, speaker, and author has written a book entitled The Sudden Caregiver, a practical and proven guide, a roadmap, and a comfort source, especially for the ones where the role is unexpected. Schueler joined me this week to discuss the book in greater detail and detail her journey as a sudden caregiver. I'm Kevin McShann. Let's have this conversation. Absolutely. So, Karen, if you're ready, I'll welcome you to the program officially, and I'm excited to talk to you today about the sudden caregiver and your journey as a caregiver. Great to be with you this afternoon, and thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Kevin. So good to be here.
Absolutely. So, Karen, I wanted to start today's conversation by giving you a chance to give me a 360-degree view of your life, because I know you were involved in a number of things. You were a businesswoman, a coach, and an entrepreneur, and then you got hit with a curveball when your husband was diagnosed with cancer. So I'm wondering if you can share a little bit about your journey with me.
Absolutely. Well, you summed it up pretty nicely. I was in the middle of a fully deployed life. We had raised our kids and they were launched and things were good. And I have had my own executive coaching company for 20 years, launched on 9/11. When I realized if this was the end of the world, I wanted to be more of service and got certified and became an executive coach. Before that, I worked my way from being a technical writer to a marketing executive. I was a VP of marketing for a venture capital firm before 9/11 and decided to become a coach. I've never looked back. I love my work. I feel blessed to have found it. And I cannot believe I've been doing that for 20 years already. And then when my husband was diagnosed with cancer, it was completely out of the blue. We never saw it coming. We were really having a great time in our own lives, just having finally gotten to a place where we weren't worried so much about, our businesses were going well and the kids were good. And then I got a call. I was on site with a client and got a call from my husband, and he said, I've just been diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. And life as we know it was over. So that is the the sudden part of the Sudden Caregiver.
Absolutely, and I know one of the reasons you decided to write the book was because you wanted to give people a practical roadmap when they're dealing with such a dramatic shift in their lives. So tell me about the book and the message you were hoping to deliver in it.
Thank you. Well, there are 53 million caregivers. In the book, I say 43 and a half because that was the number on the day we published. AARP has come out with 53 million caregivers just in the US, about 11% of the populations of developed countries. So when I became a caregiver, it seemed like, well, there are a lot of caregivers who are already caregivers. Someone has figured this out. And there were books about caregiving, but they weren't what I felt I needed, which was someone to tell me what to expect, what was the road ahead, and what would make me be able to predict some of the things, even though it's a very unpredictable situation and role. I wanted to try to foresee some of the things in the future. And that book, as far as I could tell, did not exist. So as I went through my caregiving journey, I kept track of the things that worked well, that I needed, that I figured out, and the things that didn't work well. And as I just kept a journal and kept notes on that, and talked to my husband about it while he was still alive. And we talked about what would benefit other caregivers. And when he passed away, people grieve in different ways. One of my ways was to start this book and really persist in writing it.
I'm curious, Karen, was it a therapeutic experience for you to write the book?
It was yes and no. It was, I think, cathartic. I really did feel like I had learned something that I could impart. So that part of it, I think, has always been really motivating for me. The other part of it is it's hard to write. Even my friends who have some of the caregivers who are talked about or interviewed in the book, they got the book and just felt like, oh, I can't relive this experience. So writing the book was reliving a really heartbreaking, heart-wrenching 18 months of my life and my husband's life.
And as you know, Karen, I was born with what's called spastic quadriplegia of cerebral palsy, which simply means I don't have enough oxygen in my legs to walk normally. So I know all about caregiving and the PSW lifestyle. But for those who may be going through this the first time, can you just talk to me about the emotional and mental toll that it may take for someone going through this the first time?
Yes. So there are two things that happen when you become a caregiver. And one of them is spoken about quite a bit. There's a lot of research on it. If you flip through a book just to see about caregiving, what you're going to get is a download of all the things that are stressful about caregiving. It is emotionally and physically taxing and stressful. At any given time, you don't control your schedule as much as you do when you're not a caregiver. There's a physical health impact of caregiving, because what caregivers tend to do is put their own health aside in order to prioritize the person in their care. So everything I just said is absolutely true. And there are lots of numbers about how bad it can be for caregivers, especially just coming out of COVID. The other side of it, and the side that doesn't get talked about as much and is definitely a cornerstone of my book, is the fact that caregiving is a source of well-being. It can be a source of well-being. And when I started interviewing, so I started writing the book with my own experience, but then I started interviewing other caregivers. There was a point at which I was just attracting them to myself because people knew I was writing the book and would say, would you talk to this friend of mine or my cousin or my nephew. And so I started talking to people and hearing their stories about caregiving. And it was much more aligned with mine, which was once you get through crisis and you put some systems in place, you have a life that is what I call in my book as normal as possible. But that doesn't mean you don't get surprised, you don't end up in crisis again, you're not headed back to the ER. All those things are true. And at the same time, so caregivers were reporting to me, well, I'm closer to the person in my care, we have a stronger relationship now because we're so focused on each other and the level of care. Or I'm really proud of how I got through that really difficult situation, which would be a positive emotion. Or this is so important to me. It's so engaging to me. When I'm in the trying to figure out a problem for the person in my care, I just go in the zone because I'm good at it and I really want to be doing it. Those things are part of a well-being model. Like well-being has been studied, and there's evidence that says well-being is made up of positive emotions, engagement, positive relationships, having meaning and accomplishment. And so when I was talking to caregivers, that's what they were reporting to me. And it was also part of my own lived experience.
Absolutely. And I'm going to build off that by asking you about the importance of building a caregiver community and a lifeline of support for caregivers. How important do you think that is?
I think it's one of the first things that I tell people when someone says, I've just become a caregiver, or, this is happening, what do I do? One of the first things, and I learned this the hard way. So first of all, caregivers, most of us, certainly me, we don't like to ask for help. And so that's one of the first things. If you're self-sufficient, you think you've just got it. The problem with being self-sufficient as a caregiver is the work comes at you. You can't plan it, you can't predict it. And all of a sudden you feel like you're running on a treadmill that's just going faster and faster than your ability to keep pace. So one of the things to break out of that default mode of self-sufficiency is to learn how to ask for help. But I do not recommend asking for help to just anybody, because we all know people who really want to be helpful, but actually will make more work. So what I have advised, and it seems to work for people, is figure out what you cannot do or don't like to do. It's not in your ability, or you don't have the time for it, and literally make a list of it. And I list some things in my book, but things like calling the insurance company, handling your finances, figuring out legal stuff, getting someone. A lot of people will offer to cook you meals, especially in the beginning. Say yes to anyone who offers to give you food, but also they line up someone for those days when you're at the hospital in treatment, it goes longer than you think, and you're going to come home to an empty house, a cold and empty house, that you might have some food in the freezer. And so figuring out what those tasks are, and then lining them up with the people that you utterly trust. So this is not the time to say, oh, I was in this person's wedding, so let me have them help me. This is not payback time. It's really who in my world can show up for me and be really reliable, and not wait until you need that, but line them up ahead of time and say, when I have a question about finances and insurance and I don't understand it, can I call you? And I had a numbers guy, my friend Richard, and he would be the person I would call when I had that kind of question. And I had a mentor who had been through cancer with a partner before and lost his partner. So I would call him when I wanted to understand, this is happening. Have you seen this before? What can I do? So I call that the care leading squad, and it's going to be different for everybody, but reach out to people who you trust. And if you're new in a community, this question has come up. Look to your local hospital for support groups, because they are around you, and you may not be seeing them or be aware of them.
Yeah, absolutely. I always say it's the power of collaboration when it comes to caregiving, right?
Yep, exactly.
To that point, I've been curious to ask you this question all afternoon. What do you think the impact of COVID has had on caregivers?
Well, I actually, when I was writing my book, I'd finished my book in December of 2019, and then COVID. And so when right before we were going to press, I thought, I better add something about COVID. And originally I thought I'd have to rewrite the book. But what I found is when about 6 months into COVID, we started getting statistics on caregiving and the impact of COVID on caregiving. And one thing is true, that more caregivers were minted during COVID than, at a faster pace than previously. So we swelled our ranks of caregivers. More millennials now are caregivers as a result of COVID, for example. But what I thought would happen is that there would be a different set of activities that would have to take place if you were a caregiver during COVID. And in fact, there are a few things that are different. For example, if you were caring for someone during COVID and you were the person to leave the house, go to the grocery store, run the errands, and come back, caregivers would say, if my person in my care gets COVID, it's because of me. So extra precaution, extra fear, extra worry was definitely on the shoulders of caregivers. Another thing that was different was, and I always ask caregivers to think about what are some things you can do to just get a little bit of time for yourself during the day. Well, when you have a situation where everyone's working from home and no one's leaving the house, you don't really have that many opportunities to take that sort of 15-minute break or an hour break or run to the gym or whatever it is that you used to do, because everybody is in the house and in the same situation. So if you had a support group that you were leaving the house and going to, you would have to do that over a video conference like Zoom. And that didn't work then you have no privacy. So it was very tough for people to get that level of support from the outside. But one thing that is positive about it, I think, is the ascendancy of telehealth. So telehealth has been around, but it wasn't something we were using at the rate that we started using it during COVID. And to me, it's a silver lining, because what I said earlier, when caregivers put their own health aside, it's because they don't have the cycles to get themselves to the doctor, to get to a doctor's visit. But with telehealth, your doctors are very readily available. And so caregivers did start using telehealth. Now, it's not great. There are people in our care who go, I don't like technology. I like seeing my doctor. So there was a bit of a downside, but I think it's here to stay. It's the scaffolding is in place now, and we will use it in many ways, non-COVID.
Yeah, I used to work in inclusive employment for individuals with disabilities. And one of the things I've told people is that the advancement of technology will also help those with disabilities and who have needed care to get jobs faster as well. So there is a benefit there as well. But I'm also curious to ask you about honoring your late husband's legacy and whether you think the book is a way to do that. And how else have you tried to honor your husband's legacy?
Well, I definitely think the book is that. If we can, my mission to honor his legacy is to reach as many caregivers as I can, to help them with any aspect. Like, you don't have to read the whole book and do everything that's in it, but I've gotten feedback where people say, that piece you talked about, your care leading squad, that really meant something to me, something I hadn't done, but I was encouraged to do it because I read it in your book. Or, I have a whole piece on resilience. But my late husband was a master of the universe. He had a big footprint in the world. And he wrote a lot about and spoke a lot about global economy, how to beat terrorism, how to measure corruption in various countries around the world. I mean, he thought big. Our joke was, I was local, he was global. And I was not when I lost him, and we lost him way too soon. He was he actually coined the term thought leader when he was an editor at the Harvard Business Review. So when we lost him, I knew I was not going to be able to carry on his work in global economics. That's not who I am. But what I decided to do, one of my classmates at University of Pennsylvania, where I study positive psychology, his name is Dr. Joe Casper, and he created a concept during our class. His thesis was on co-destiny. He calls it co-destiny. And Joe had lost his son when he was in his late teens from a form of epilepsy that ended up being fatal. And so as a dad, he created this concept of, if I can carry on my work in the name of my son, he called it co-destiny. And when I heard him speak about it, I adopted that right away. And so the work I can do and the motivation to continue it has so much to do with my husband's legacy, but it really is about getting the book done, getting it out into the world, speaking about it, reaching out to caregivers, taking any phone call from any caregiver. I mean, that's happening, and I'm just blessed to be able to do that work.
Well, Karen offers these inspirational words of encouragement for any caregiver going through the process for the very first time.
What I want caregivers to take away is the caregiver's paradox that yes, it is tough, and yes, it is also a source of well-being, and you have to cultivate that. So it's just like anything. There's something in psychology called the negativity bias, which is that we are all programmed to look at what's bad in our environments in order to save ourselves, survive, eliminate it. So if you walk out of a cave and you see a lion on one side and a rainbow on the other, you're going to run from the lion, not necessarily toward the rainbow. And that is something that it's a natural part of who we are. As caregivers, that's how we hone our senses in order to be able to protect the people in our care. It's not just us, it's everyone that we're trying to take care of. And there is also an opportunity to intentionally build your own practice of resilience, to intentionally see in a bad day, there were some good things, and to accept the good. And that's a hard thing to do on any given day of the week. But my message of inspiration is it can be done. It's a practice, like leadership is a practice, playing a musical instrument is a practice. We have to intentionally set our sights on it every single day.
And Karen, I'm curious to ask you about your personal and professional legacy and how you'd like that to be defined.
Well, when I was a marketing professional through my career, before I became a coach, I had a sense that I used to joke that what I was doing had no cosmic significance. I do believe that since I became a coach, and one of the things I teach is a course called Visionology, where I ask every leader, and this is on my executive coaching side, sometimes companies will give me like 30 leaders who they want to get from one level to another. And I start them with this concept of, what is your vision? What do you stand for? And I've literally taught this to hundreds of executives, of leaders. And what they come up with is so personal. It's all inside us. We each have our own driver, our own thing that we stand for, but we don't always know how to articulate it. So part of my work in the world is to help people lead with that kind of vision, because if you can get it right, you impact, the statistics say each of us as a leader has 12 people attached to us who are impacted by how we show up, what our moods are, the things we say, the things we don't say. And each of those people has 12 people. And you take that 3 degrees of separation out, you as a leader are influencing a lot of people if you can get your message right. So my message, because I teach it, people want to know mine, and mine is changing the world one leader at a time. That's what I think my legacy is.
Absolutely. And I have to ask you if people wanted to get in contact with you or buy the book, what's the best way they can do that?
Well, the book is for sale in paperback and ebook on Amazon. I'm creating an Audible version of it as we speak because caregivers need to be able to listen. They don't have a lot of time to sit and read, but it is on Amazon, The Sudden Caregiver. And my website is www.thesuddencaregiver.com. And on my website, there are a lot of free tools. There are a few things you can download and get started on your own without even having the book. So feel free to take a look at that. And, so the Pathways to Wellbeing, which is in chapter 2, and the Roadmap, which is in chapter 3, those are downloadable right from that website. And my email address is on the website as well.
Fantastic. Well, Karen, I have to tell you, as someone who's dealt with caregivers for the duration of my life, I want to thank you for the great work that you've done to inspire those who take care of those who need caregivers, and for your own personal inspiration, and for joining me this afternoon. It's most appreciated.
Thank you so much. It's been such an honor and a privilege to be here, Kevin.